My name is Jackson Reed, and for most of my life, I lived simply, honestly, just a pensioner renting a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. I never had much, but I always gave my son, James, a helping hand whenever life knocked him down. I never thought betrayal would come from my own flesh and blood. But one bright spring morning, as sunlight crept across my little kitchen, a single envelope changed everything. I found the letter from City West Bank lying beside my coffee cup, and as soon as I read the numbers, my heart nearly stopped. $200,000? A loan in my name? I'd never borrowed that much, not even for a house. I put on my old reading glasses, hoping I'd just read it wrong. My name, my address, even my signature, there at the bottom, looking as real as my own hand. Only, I had never signed anything. My hand started to shake as I called the number on the letter, the paper crumpling in my fist. City West Bank, this is Karen speaking. How can I help you? Her voice was cheerful, and for a moment, I wished I could ignore the problem, just sip my coffee, pretend everything was normal. But I pushed down the fear and explained what I saw. She put me on hold, came back with bad news. Yes, Mr. Reed, the loan was approved on March 3rd, and the funds were transferred that same day to your joint account with James Reed. My son's name felt like a punch to the gut. Years ago, after my wife passed away, I added him to my account. Just in case. It was supposed to be for emergencies, not for stealing the roof from over my head. Are you okay, Mr. Reed? Would you like to report this as fraud? Karen's tone was gentle, but my throat was dry as dust. I just managed a "thank you," hung up, and sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on my wall. My own son had forged my signature, taken out a massive loan, and left me to drown. I didn't have time to cry. I was going to act. I pulled my best jacket out of the closet, same one I wore to James's wedding, and slipped the loan letter into my pocket. As I stepped out into the busy Chicago streets, all I could think about was the years of trust I'd handed over, now turned against me. James lived in a neighborhood I'd never been able to afford, a place where all the lawns looked like golf courses and the houses had double garages. His new Cadillac was in the driveway, parked next to a silver Mercedes. I walked up the path, my steps heavy with anger and disbelief. James opened the door, surprised. Dad, you could have called. He started, but I pushed past him into a living room that looked like a showroom. Leather sofas, designer art, an aquarium the size of my old bathtub. None of this had existed before he married Brianna. Now it was clear whose money had paid for all this. I tossed the letter onto the kitchen counter. Do you want to explain this? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. James went pale. He glanced upstairs, shifting from foot to foot. It must be a mistake, Dad. Banks mess things up all the time, you know how it is. He tried to laugh it off, but the lie hung in the air. Save it, James. I cut him off. I called the bank. They confirmed the transfer to you. You forged my signature, stole from your own father. His shoulders slumped, eyes darting to the staircase. That's when Brianna appeared, coming down in a yoga outfit worth more than a month of my rent. She barely glanced at me. Oh, Mr. Reed, is everything drama with you? She said, her voice like cold water down my back. I ignored her and faced my son. Why, James? Why would you do this? He looked at Brianna, then back at me. I just thought you'd understand, Dad. You always said family is everything. I wanted Brianna to have the life she deserves. You don't use that money anyway. This is all for the family. He sounded almost proud. I couldn't find the boy I'd raised. Instead, there was a grown man who'd sold his father's trust for a fancy house and a pile of debt. I stared at Brianna. She just rolled her eyes. Honestly, Jackson, you're not getting any younger. Isn't it better to help us now, instead of hoarding money for yourself? That did it. For the first time in my life, I felt ice in my veins. My own son, my daughter-in-law, people I'd worked myself half to death for, had written me off as a burden. I turned without another word and left their house, the door clicking shut behind me. As I walked back to my beat-up Chevy, I realized I had a choice. I could be a victim, or I could fight back. I decided then and there, I wouldn't let this end with me losing everything. But that, my friend, is just the beginning. The morning after my confrontation with James and Brianna, I sat in my kitchen, staring at 3 envelopes from City West Bank. Each one was marked urgent in thick, red letters. Collection notice. Default warning. Foreclosure threat. My hands shook as I opened them one by one, laying the papers out across my worn kitchen table like I was plotting a battle. And that's exactly what this was now, a fight for my dignity and survival. I spent the weekend pacing my tiny apartment, replaying every word from James and Brianna. Their faces haunted me, their casual cruelty twisting deeper than any wound. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. But old habits die hard. After 40 years in banking, I knew the rules of the game. The bank wouldn't care about family drama or hurt feelings. To them, I was just a name on a loan they expected to be repaid. Monday morning, I put on my best shirt and walked the 6 blocks to City West's downtown branch. The marble floors echoed under my feet, just like they did the day my colleagues threw me a retirement party 3 years earlier. I walked past the same old water cooler, the framed photos of Employee of the Month, and into the branch manager's office. Margaret Weiss was polite but blunt, just like she'd always been. "Mr. Reed, the loan was executed correctly. Your name, your signature as co-signer. I'm afraid you're responsible for the full balance unless your son starts making payments." She slid a thick file across the desk toward me, her expression softening. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, Jackson. Family situations can be complicated." Complicated. That's one word for it. I left the bank feeling smaller than ever, walking the long way home along Lake Michigan, hoping the cold wind might clear my head. I needed a plan, and I needed help. That evening I called James. Brianna answered, her voice sharp as ever. "James isn't available. He's busy. Tell him the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings." "He knows my number," I replied. There was a long pause before she hung up. By then I'd accepted the truth. James had no intention of helping. Brianna would spend every dollar she could get, and I'd be left holding the bag. If I didn't act, I'd lose my home, my pension, everything I'd worked my whole life for. I dusted off my old yellow legal pad, the same one I used for big problems at the bank, and started making lists. Names. Numbers. Connections. If James was willing to forge my signature for $200,000, how far had he gone for smaller amounts? And had he done it to anyone else? The next morning, I called Liz Dunn, an old friend who'd started as a teller the same year I became a loan officer. We met for coffee at a diner near the river, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone "Hon." Liz's face was kind, but serious as she flipped through the papers I handed her. "Jackson, I hate to tell you this, but James has applied for credit at Commerce Bank 3 times in the last year. He used you as a reference, and the signatures looked off, so we denied him." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "He's done this before, Jack. This wasn't a one-time thing." The realization hit me like a hammer. This was a pattern. Not a mistake, not a single lapse, but a system. My son had become a professional liar. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in another office, this time across from Tom Rodriguez at Great Lakes Credit Union. Tom had investigated fraud for years before becoming a credit analyst. He was grim as he compared documents, typing away at his computer. "Jackson, this fits a pattern we've seen. Multiple applications at different banks, escalating amounts, forged signatures. He's been building to this for over a year." The evidence piled up. for banks. Dozens of applications. Some approved, some denied, but the total was staggering, nearly $300,000 in attempted fraud, and at least $60,000 already funded. My stomach twisted. James hadn't just stolen from me, he'd been stealing from banks all over Illinois, using my good name as his golden ticket. I drove home in silence, clutching a folder thick with credit reports and printouts. That night, I sorted everything chronologically, the way I used to prepare for big audits. One name kept popping up, Michael Webb, with an address I didn't recognize and a signature that looked suspiciously like Brianna's handwriting. My phone rang just as I was taping down the last piece of evidence. Liz again. Jack, you need to know something about Brianna. She's been visiting banks all over town, sometimes alone, sometimes with a man named Michael Webb. They're working together. It wasn't just James. It was a full-blown operation. On Friday morning, I parked my old Chevy 3 blocks from James's house and watched, camera in hand, just like the fraud investigator I used to be. At noon, Brianna left the house in her Mercedes and headed straight for the ritziest shopping district in Chicago. Nordstrom, Saks, Cartier. I took pictures as she breezed through stores, picking out jewelry and designer bags. The store clerks knew her by name. At 2 o'clock, she met Michael Webb for lunch at a high-end Italian restaurant. They hugged, they laughed, and she handed him a sleek, expensive watch. It was a scene that might have made me laugh, if it hadn't been funded by money stolen from me. I snapped photo after photo. Brianna, buying gifts. Michael, beaming like he just won the lottery. Champagne, caviar, luxury dripping from every movement. All while I was facing foreclosure and wondering how to pay for groceries next week. That night, as I reviewed my photos and notes, a new feeling settled in. No more tears, no more pity. Now it was war. By Saturday, I'd filled half a notebook with evidence, loan applications, photographs, phone records, and a timeline that made me sick just to look at. I knew my son was in deep, but the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Brianna and this Michael Webb were the true masterminds. James was just the convenient key to my entire life's work. I spent Sunday contacting everyone I thought James might have targeted, old friends, family acquaintances, even my next-door neighbor from 20 years ago. I found 3 more people who'd been burned, an elderly woman named Linda Martinez, a single mother named Sarah Williams, and Tom Harper, a church friend who once helped James get his first summer job. Each had a different story, but all ended the same: forged documents, empty promises, and money that vanished as soon as James or Brianna got what they wanted. Linda was the hardest to face. We met at a quiet cafe, where she clutched a worn-out purse and trembled as she spoke. He told me you were sick, Jack. Said you needed surgery, and he needed a co-signer for a medical loan. He promised to pay it back as soon as you recovered. But then, nothing. I've got $15,000 of debt in my name now. Tears welled in her eyes. I reached across the table, putting my hand over hers. Linda, you're not alone. I'm getting to the bottom of this. I meant it. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a sense of purpose. If I couldn't protect myself, maybe I could protect everyone else. Monday morning, I took my stack of evidence to the law office of Patricia Stone. She'd been the best fraud prosecutor in Chicago before starting her own firm. Patricia listened as I laid out the details, barely interrupting, her pen flying across her notepad. When I finished, she pushed her glasses up her nose and looked at me with a kind of fierce respect. Mr. Reed, you've built a better case than half the police detectives I've worked with. With this much documentation, we can file charges for criminal fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and if the evidence supports it, seek restitution. Everything they bought with stolen money can be seized and sold. The words hit me like a jolt of cold water. I'd been so focused on the loss that I'd forgotten there might be a path to justice. maybe even recovery. Patricia asked if I could organize a meeting of all the victims. Strength in numbers, she said. The more people we have on the record, the harder it will be for the defense to spin this as a misunderstanding. That Wednesday, we met in a stuffy room at the local community center. 7 of us, all carrying folders and stories, some scared, some angry, none of us willing to be victims anymore. I stood at the front with a whiteboard, outlining the timeline just like I did in my banking days. This isn't a mistake, I told them. It's a scheme. And we're going to fight it together. As people shared their stories, I felt the tide shifting. We weren't just targets, we were a team, a coalition, and now we had Patricia Stone on our side. She laid out the plan, filed charges, seize assets, coordinate with law enforcement and the banks, and make sure every victim got justice and restitution. The sense of unity gave me hope for the first time in weeks. As I packed up my notes and walked home that evening, my phone buzzed. A text from James. "We need to talk. Don't do anything stupid, Dad." I stared at the message, remembering the desperate look on his face as I'd left his house days before. He was scared, and he had every reason to be. For once, the consequences were coming for him, not me. I didn't answer. Instead, I kept walking, feeling the city's lights and energy around me. For years, I'd been the one to forgive, to give second chances. But this time, I was going to finish what I'd started. The next move was mine. The next day, I sat at my kitchen table, the stack of evidence and notes in front of me, when my phone rang. It was James, sounding more frantic than I'd ever heard him. "Dad, we need to talk. You're making a big mistake with these people you're calling. This could ruin everything." I almost laughed. "Everything?" I said quietly. "James, everything was ruined the moment you decided to steal from your own father." He tried to sound tough, but his voice was shaking. "Look, Dad, this is family business. We can settle it ourselves. You don't need to drag strangers into it. Think about Brianna, think about your grandson." That last line stung. He was playing the guilt card, as always. I took a breath. "I'm done thinking about your excuses. You want to talk? Meet me in public, and don't bring your wife." There was a long pause, then James agreed. We settled on Romano's, a classic old diner downtown where no one could make a scene. I arrived early and watched him walk in, shoulders hunched, eyes darting around the room. He slid into the booth across from me, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. He leaned in, voice low. "Dad, just stop this. We can fix it. Maybe if you drop the charges, we can figure out a payment plan. Or I can talk to the bank, get them to lower the payments. Please, you have to give me a chance." I slid the folder of evidence across the table. "James, this isn't just about me anymore. You've scammed half a dozen people, neighbors, friends, even family. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." He stared at the photos, his hands trembling. "You don't understand. Brianna, she was never satisfied. Nothing was ever enough. I tried to keep up, but..." His voice broke. "I never wanted it to go this far. I thought I could fix it before you ever found out. By forging my signature? By lying to everyone who ever trusted you." My words were calm, but the anger underneath was hard as stone. James buried his face in his hands. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who begged me to fix his toy car or teach him to ride a bike. But that was a long time ago. "Dad, I'm sorry," he whispered. I made a mess, and I don't know how to get out." "You face the consequences," I said. "You talked to Patricia Stone. You cooperate fully. If you do, maybe the judge will go easier on you. But you're not dragging me down with you, not this time." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks. "What about Brianna?" he asked. "You'll have to ask her yourself. Looks to me like she's already planning her exit." James looked up, startled. What do you mean? I told him what I'd learned about Brianna's shopping trips. Her secret meetings with Michael Webb, the expensive gifts, the lunches that weren't for business but for pleasure. He was stunned into silence. That's not possible, he muttered, shaking his head. She wouldn't. She would, James. She already has. He left Romano's a broken man, shoulders slumped, hope gone from his eyes. As I watched him disappear into the gray afternoon, I realized this was only the beginning. There were still legal battles to fight, assets to recover, and truth to shine on every dark corner they'd left behind. But I didn't feel like a victim anymore. For the first time in months, I felt in control. I walked out of Romano's and into the wind, ready to finish what I'd started. After meeting James at Romano's, I barely slept. The memory of his tears, the look on his face when I told him about Brianna's betrayal, haunted me. But there was no time for sympathy. The law doesn't wait for broken hearts. The next morning, I met with Patricia Stone at her office. She had already begun filing the paperwork, organizing statements from all the victims, and preparing evidence for both criminal and civil court. She looked at me over her glasses. Jackson, with this much documentation, we're looking at serious charges: bank fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, you name it. She went over the strategy step by step. First, criminal charges would freeze James and Brianna's accounts. Then, a civil suit for restitution, recovering as much stolen money as possible for every victim. The more victims we have cooperating, the stronger the case, Patricia said. We need everyone to stick together. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls, checking on Linda, Sarah, Tom, and the others. They were nervous, but also grateful that someone was finally taking their stories seriously. For years, James and Brianna had preyed on people's trust. That was over. By Friday, the legal machine was in motion. James called twice, left messages I didn't answer. On Saturday, I heard from Brianna for the first time since I confronted them. She left a voicemail, her voice clipped and cold. Jackson, you need to stop this. You're ruining your own son's life, and mine. Think about your grandson. Is this what you want? I deleted the message without a second thought. Monday morning, the story broke in the local news. Retired banker leads fraud investigation against family members. I never imagined my name would be in a headline like that, but there it was: photo, interview, and a short statement from Patricia. Mr. Reed's determination and attention to detail made this investigation possible. We hope it encourages other victims of financial exploitation to come forward. My phone rang off the hook: friends, old coworkers, people I hadn't heard from in years. Most wanted to support me, some were shocked, some angry, some just curious. It didn't matter. The important thing was that the truth was out there. That afternoon, James showed up at my apartment. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I need your help. Brianna left this morning. Took our son and half the money from the account before they froze it. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was too late for regrets. James, you made choices. Now you have to live with them. He sat on my worn-out couch, head in his hands. I was so stupid, Dad. I let her talk me into everything. The loans, the lies, all of it. She promised we'd pay it back before anyone noticed. You've hurt a lot of good people, James. Me included. He nodded, eyes rimmed red. I'll do whatever I can. Testify, cooperate. I need you to forgive me. Forgiveness. It was a word I'd always believed in. But as I looked at my son, I realized forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past. It meant letting go, and moving forward, even if it meant leaving someone behind. You need to take responsibility, James. Start there. The rest, we'll see. As he left, I looked around my quiet apartment, the afternoon light slanting through the window. I'd lost a lot, but I'd gained something, too, the knowledge that standing up for yourself, even against your own family, wasn't weakness. It was survival. And the fight wasn't over yet. A week after the news story broke, everything in my life changed. The phone calls kept coming, this time from other people who'd been targeted by James and Brianna, people I'd never even met. A retired teacher, an old family friend, even one of James's former coworkers. Each had their own horror story, each had trusted my son or his wife, and each had been left with nothing but debt and heartbreak. Patricia Stone's office turned into command central. Every day, I went down there with folders full of emails, receipts, and affidavits from new victims. The walls filled up with charts and photos, connecting all the names and dates into a timeline that looked more like a criminal conspiracy map than anything else. Even the detectives assigned to our case were impressed by the sheer scale of it all. The investigation moved fast. Bank accounts were frozen. Credit cards were cancelled. A judge signed off on seizing the luxury car, the jewelry, and even some of Brianna's designer clothes. By the end of the week, James was living in a friend's guest room, most of his possessions boxed up and waiting for court approval before they could be sold. Brianna, for her part, vanished. She quit her job at the real estate office and took their son with her. Rumor had it she was staying with her sister out in Colorado, but no one could say for sure. Michael Webb, the other half of her scheme, was subpoenaed by the court and forced to turn over the gifts and luxury items she'd bought him with stolen money. As for me, I found myself at the center of something much bigger than family betrayal. I was the unofficial spokesperson for every victim who'd been too scared or ashamed to fight back. My days were filled with phone calls, meetings, press interviews. It was exhausting, but it was also the first time since all this started that I felt truly alive. One afternoon, Linda Martinez called me in tears. "Jackson, I got a letter from the court. They're garnishing James's wages to pay back the loan he took out in my name. I never thought I'd see a penny of that money again." "That's just the beginning, Linda," I told her. "You're going to get justice. We all are." By Friday, I'd received a certified letter from Patricia. The court date was set. 3 weeks from now, James and Brianna would be facing criminal charges, with a long line of victims ready to testify. There would be restitution, asset forfeiture, maybe even jail time. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Still, I couldn't help but feel a strange sadness. I missed my grandson. I missed the easy laughter that used to fill family gatherings. But I didn't miss the lies or the fear. That part of my life was over. Whatever came next, I knew I'd face it head on. As the sun set that evening, I sat by my window, a cup of coffee warming my hands. I wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. The reckoning was just beginning. Court day came faster than I expected. The old courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with reporters and anxious victims. I wore my best suit, a little out of style, but it still fit, and carried the briefcase that had traveled with me through 40 years of banking. I'd always believed in the system, but now, I was about to see if it would work for me. Inside, James looked like a shadow of the son I remembered, thinner, exhausted, and clearly terrified. He sat with his public defender, occasionally glancing around as if hoping Brianna would walk in and save him. But she wasn't there. Her attorney said she was unwell and would appear by video call. When Judge Harrison entered, everyone stood. The charges were read aloud: identity theft, bank fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and more. Patricia Stone spoke with a calm confidence that made me proud she was on our side. As the case unfolded, the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the wire transfers, the shopping sprees, the testimonies of neighbors and friends, it all added up to a picture even James couldn't deny. One by one, the victims told their stories. Some wept. Others shook with anger. I told mine. My voice steady, but my hands gripping the witness stand just to stop the tremble. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. James kept his eyes on the floor. Brianna's video testimony was a master class in deflection. She blamed James for everything, claimed she didn't know where the money came from, and painted herself as a loving wife who'd only wanted the best for her family. But the evidence, especially the photos of her and Michael Webb, destroyed whatever sympathy she might have earned. When Michael Webb was called to the stand, he admitted to receiving gifts and money from Brianna, but insisted he had no idea it was stolen. The judge didn't seem convinced. By the end of the day, both James and Brianna looked beaten. The prosecutor recommended asset forfeiture, restitution, and for James, probation with community service and mandatory counseling. Brianna's case was more complicated because of the child custody dispute, but the judge made it clear. No one walks away from this without consequences. After court, I found Linda, Sarah, and Tom waiting for me outside. We didn't celebrate, but we did share a moment of relief. Justice wasn't finished, but it had finally started to work. That night, James called me from a payphone. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Dad, I pled guilty. The judge said if I cooperate, I might avoid prison. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry." I didn't have the words to forgive him, not yet. "Take responsibility, James. It's all anyone can ask." The city was quiet as I walked home, the courthouse lights fading behind me. For the first time, I felt the weight start to lift, not gone, but lighter. I'd done everything I could. The rest was up to the law, and to James himself. The weeks after the trial felt strange, quiet, almost empty, but not in a bad way. My apartment was the same as always, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time since all this began, I didn't wake up with dread weighing on my chest. One by one, the victims received letters from the court about restitution. Linda got her first check, a modest amount, but it was proof that the system could work, even if slowly. Tom called me and said he'd finally been able to pay off his overdue bills. Sarah was looking for a new apartment, ready to start fresh. James, meanwhile, had moved into a small rental on the edge of town, doing court-ordered community service during the day and working evenings at a warehouse. He called a few times, always sounding tired, always apologizing. Sometimes I answered. Sometimes I didn't. One rainy Thursday, he showed up at my door, holding an umbrella and a manila envelope. He looked older, humbled, nothing like the confident young man who once believed the world owed him everything. "Dad," he started, not quite meeting my eyes, "I wanted to bring these to you in person." He handed me the envelope. Inside were letters, apologies, explanations, and a list of all the people he'd hurt. There was even a handwritten note for each victim. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly. "I just need you to know I'm trying. I know I'll never make it right, not completely, but I'm not running anymore." I sat down across from him. The silence stretched between us, not as cold as before. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to forgive him. Instead, I just felt tired. "You did terrible things, James. But facing what you've done, owning up to it, that's a start." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "I'm going to keep working. I'll pay back everyone I can. And I'll be here, if you ever want to talk." After he left, I sat with his letters for a long time. I thought about Brianna, now fighting for custody, her reputation ruined, her family shunning her. I thought about my grandson, and the hope that maybe, someday, he'd understand the truth too. The sun came out late that afternoon, sending golden stripes across my kitchen floor. For the first time, I believed real healing might be possible, not only for me, but for everyone James and Brianna had hurt. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right, as much as anyone could. And sometimes that started with the hardest thing of all: letting go. Spring finally arrived in Chicago, and with it, a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The court proceedings ended with a final order. James would spend 3 years on probation, all his wages garnished until every victim saw restitution. Brianna lost her custody battle, her reputation in shambles, forced to move back in with her parents in another state. The newspapers called it the Reed case, a cautionary tale about trust, family, and financial crime. I became something of a minor celebrity among retirees and fraud victims. A few local groups even invited me to speak about what I'd learned. I always told them the same thing. You can't choose your family, but you can choose not to let anyone, no matter how close, destroy your dignity or your future. Life settled back into its rhythms. My apartment, though humble, was mine again. Bills were paid. I went for long walks by the lake, sharing quiet greetings with neighbors who now treated me with new respect. James kept working, kept writing letters, kept showing up, not expecting forgiveness, but determined to earn it, day by day. Sometimes we'd have coffee together. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, watching the city wake up outside my window. The anger slowly faded, replaced by a kind of understanding. He was my son, after all. He made terrible choices, but he was trying to change. The other victims rebuilt, too. Linda Martinez started volunteering at the library. Sarah Williams finished night school and got a new job. Tom paid off his car and reconnected with his own family. We checked in on each other from time to time, a little network of people who refused to stay victims. Brianna, as far as I knew, disappeared from our lives. Maybe one day my grandson would seek me out. I hoped so. I'd kept a box of photos and letters for him, just in case. Some nights, I'd sit by my window, coffee in hand, and watch the city lights dance on Lake Michigan. I'd think about all I'd lost, and all I'd managed to save. Not just my home or my savings, but my self-respect, my faith in justice, and bit by bit my family. Getting older doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means finding the courage to stand up for yourself when no one else will. Sometimes it means starting over, even at 70. And sometimes it means letting go of the past, so you can finally look forward to the future.